How many of you have ever heard someone tell you to just be yourself? Get a show of hands. Pretty much everyone in the audience kind of expected that. I think we have to admit that our culture really, really likes this phrase, like a lot. My generation has either implicitly or explicitly heard just be yourself in pretty much every Disney film and cartoon of the last 25 years. We saw it in those motivational posters that they would put up in our high schools, like the ones in the guidance counselors' offices with the soaring eagles and the foggy mountaintops and the sunrises and then that hideous Times New Roman font underneath that says, just be yourself. We've also seen it in BuzzFeed and Facebook articles where they said, well, Stacy just needed to learn how to be herself, and that solved everything. Of course, we've also seen it in Hallmark movies, not that I've ever watched one of those. And then, of course, the graduation cards that we would all get, right? Remember, you're a winner, champ. Just remember to be yourself. The fact is that this line of advice to just be ourselves is ubiquitous in our culture today. You hear it everywhere, you see it everywhere, and pretty much everyone agrees that it's really good advice to live by. I mean, who would argue with the advice that you should be yourself? I would. But it's not that I have a problem with people developing a good and healthy sense of self-esteem, a good and healthy sense of self and well-being. It's not what I'm saying, but what I am trying to point out is that culturally we are seeing an overinflation of self-regard, an obsession with the self that is working its way into our society and into our culture and implanting a deep-rooted narcissism there. But before I get into that, I think we should give credit where credit is due. And just be yourself, or a phrase in the same vein like follow your heart, has its merits, and we should acknowledge them. They remind us to be optimistic, to be confident, to use our God-given talents, to not siphon off of someone else's personality, but to express our individuality, to develop an authentic sense of self. All those things are good things. But what happens when the advice to just be yourself goes unscrutinized and unquestioned? What happens when a culture like ours takes just be yourself too far and starts to believe the notion that was so beautifully refuted by author and blogger Scott Young, that above all else, you are called to be yourself. Just be yourself. Just be who you are. Love who you are. Admire who you are. Believe in who you are. It's your time, your moment, your truth. You are what's most important. The new Diet Coke commercial, by the way, is a perfect example of this. I don't know if any of you have seen this, but I was watching Hulu the other night at 1 a.m, as millennials are wont to do. And I saw this commercial and I thought, I have to put this in. This is just absolutely the antithesis of what I want to tell you today. So I'll give you the rundown in case you haven't seen it. So there's this nice 20-something girl, takes a can of Diet Coke, and she opens it up and says, what do I love about Diet Coke? Well, first she says, it's delicious, right? Then she says, it makes me feel good. Life is short. Just do you, whatever that may be. If you want to live in a yurt it up. If you want to run a marathon, that sounds really hard, but okay. And if you want to have a Diet Coke, well, have a Diet Coke. Then it ends with this. Diet Coke, because I can. It makes me feel good. Just do you, because I can. That is the anthem of a just be yourself generation that has gone off the rails. Turns out other people have noticed this. In May of 2013, a guy named Joel Stein wrote an article for Time magazine called Millennials, the me generation. And he does actually point out some of the redemptive qualities of millennials that he thinks will actually help them save the country. But he also points to some very interesting statistics about millennials that I thought I would share with you. For example, he found that more millennials, scored higher on narcissism scales in college in 2009 than the college students did in the 1980s. He also found that narcissistic personality disorder was 3 times higher in the under 25 category than in the 65 and up group. Now, you could probably guess why that is, right? And 65 and uppers have had enough time to figure out that they're not such hot stuff, and now they're much more humble because of it. But he also points out that 60% of millennials said that their litmus test for making a moral decision was, how do I feel about that? So instead of appealing to an objective sense of morality or an ethical code, when faced with a tough decision, the question would be, how does that make me feel? I'll be able to feel what's right. I will know. It's inside of me. I know the answer. He also found that millennials were more fame-obsessed. He also found that they were more entitled. And also interesting, he found that they were compelled to exaggerate their realities. So on social media, when they saw someone's fabulous life that they felt they couldn't compete with, they needed to up the ante, make it look better, put a nicer filter on it, compete better. Now, all of this sounds pretty disheartening, right? But is it really a surprise to any of us? I mean, my generation is called the selfie generation for a reason. This is a time when 1,000 selfies are posted to Instagram every 10 seconds, and it's now estimated that the average millennial will take 25,000 pictures of their face before they die. We can see that culturally we are snagged in a social media feedback loop. A me-first ethos, a tendency to use social media or communications or any other form to promote self-adulation and self-glorification. We feed off of affirmation and publicity. Not knowing what to do with the vague advice to just be ourselves, we've instead decided as a society that we will just adore and live for ourselves. For the selfie generation, the world revolves around us and our identities, and nothing should ever get in the way of me being myself, me being me, or at least living out a charade of myself on social media. I think we can truly say that the selfie generation has become the selfish generation. The byproduct of this infatuation with the self is inevitably apathy towards the problems of others. Are we too enamored with ourselves, too fixated on showing the world who we are, to hear its cries for help? Are we in reality just blinded by ourselves? We started out with well-meaning advice to just be ourselves, but that devolved into narcissism, and now it's heading into very dangerous territory, where we have a world full of people isolated into their own self-absorbed bubbles. Will that serve us? Is that really what we want for ourselves as a university, as a community, as a country? In a technology and social media-driven world, this problem is only going to get worse. It's not going to subside on its own. It's not a phase. It's going to snowball from here. Do we really want to see ourselves become a nation of 320 million narcissists? How are we ever supposed to tackle any of the innumerable problems in this world if we're all too self-engrossed and too self-absorbed on our little phones to get up and do anything about it? Well, enough on the problem. What's the solution? Where do we want to see ourselves go instead? I would say that just be yourself has had its time. We've allowed it into our society, but it's almost conquered us. So now more than ever, it's time that we reignite the call to humility. Get away from all this selfishness. Bring back humility. Now, what do I mean by humility? Is it the kind of humility that a person gets an award and gets in front of an audience and says, "Thank you for recognizing my achievements. I know I am very qualified, and you're all aware of that, so awesome. But I'm very humbled to be here today to present my speech for you. I'm very humbled to be giving a TED Talk today." No, the kind of humility I'm talking about is the kind that drives its practitioners to lead lives that are gracious, unassuming, and character-driven. Lives that are lived under the conviction that I am not the center of the universe. I am not all that. Lives that believe in listening and understanding, as opposed to performing and flaunting for other people. Lives that are grounded in love and service towards others. That seems like a tall order, but by no means do I stand in front of you today and say, I am the exemplar of the humble lifestyle. Look at me, do what I do, and you'll be humble. No, I am not the exemplar of the humble lifestyle. I have to work at this all the time. I'm a proud person. But I have something to say about it, because I was exposed to this my whole life, in the people of my parents. Hi, Mom. Getting all teary over there. Day in and day out, my parents showed nothing but love, sacrifice, and dedication. They never drew attention to themselves. They never put their wants and needs in front of anyone else. They always thought of their kids and other people first. Service. I was blessed to grow up with people like them. But if that's not your story, and you don't have parents like that you can look up to, it's ever more critical that you find people like that. Surround yourself with them, peers, mentors. Model yourself after them. Strive to be humble like they are. And then once you've done that, model that for someone else so that they'll look at your example and want to live like you. And we'll really get this trend going in the right direction. For the sake of this hurting world, and for the sake of all your future children, to whom it will be so critical that you pass on the lesson of humility and service, I tell you, don't just be yourself. Rather, humble yourself and go outside of yourself so that you can serve this broken world with those talents and those traits that make you unique. Humble yourself, and we will watch this world change for the better. Thank you.